Hi, I'm Larry Puckett. Now, as I promised you at the end of last week's video, I'm back here at the module. And what I'm going to be doing today is going over some revisions that I made to the track plan that we transferred to the layout last time, and give you some tips that you need to be aware of when you're planning your modules and laying out your track plans, because it is a multi-step process. And we're going to start off by looking at the actual changes that I have made on the layout, and then at the end I'll take you back to the diagrams or the drawings that I showed you previously, and I'll show you on those what I've done, because there's a couple of important things I want to share with you about those as well. So let's roll the opening and get started. Hit that little red subscribe button, and when the little bell comes up, click on it and click all. Now, the first thing I want to show you is how I'm going to actually control the double crossover here on the model railroad. So let me show you that first. This is something that I saved from the old Piedmont Southern layout, and it was made for me by a viewer who volunteered to create this, because we had a discussion about the Walther's double crossover and how you could control all 4 sets of points simultaneously, as opposed to using 4 separate tortoise or other type switch machines. So he was a mechanical engineer who was involved in prototyping and developing prototypes of complicated equipment, had a metal shop in his house, so he designed this and built it for me and shipped it to me. It's very complex sets of levers and the like in here, all operated by one tortoise switch machine. The way it works is, all of those complicated connectors go to these little wires here that stick up through the layout and through the point throw bar mechanism. So when you activate the tortoise switch machine and it starts to move, then these wires move and open and close the points. So with this setup, it actually either sets all of the routes to straight through, or it sets it up as a crossover. And actually in the prototype, they would only do 1 set of points at a time, or 2 sets to get a crossover. But in this case, it really doesn't matter, and it's actually better than using 2 or 4 switch machines in order to control all 4 of these sets of points. So this will be installed under the layout, underneath of the Walther's double crossover, and all I have to do is throw 1 address or activate 1 address for this switch machine, and we will have the points set one way or the other. And all I have to do is drill the holes and install the sucker, and it's going to be ready to go. So that's one thing right there. So let me put this over here where it's going to go. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to bring you in here close and show you various areas on the modules where I modified the track plan. Now, one thing that a couple of people commented on was the fact that this turnout was set up across the gap between the modules. And that placement was more or less dictated by the placement of the double crossover behind it and all the other turnout and the like. So it really can't be moved, okay? So the real important thing here is not the fact that it's a crossover, because there's a gap right here too. And there's a gap going to be there, and a gap going to be up here, and a gap back here. So the fact that these rails from the turnout actually cross the gap is not important. The important thing is that it not interfere with any of these other movable rails back here, the closure rails, or that it not cut underneath the frog or anything like that. And the one thing I've made sure of here is that the cut will be made right after these jumpers. So those jumpers will be back here, and they will guarantee that all of these rails are powered. Now that leaves these rails unpowered, but they will be connected to these rails and the rail that goes here, and I will add feeders to all of that, so they will be powered. So that's not a concern. And so it's just a matter, I will set this up in place with the module bolted together like this, in alignment, and then I will take either a Dremel tool or a razor saw and cut through the rails here so that we've got a very, very, very fine joint. and you get a clickety-clack. That's prototypical. So I'm not concerned about that. Everything is going to be taken care of, and because we've got the alignment dowel set up on the module, every time I reconnect this, it's going to be in perfect alignment. So that's not a real concern for me. Okay, let's look a little bit further back because the question also arose back there as well. Okay, so in the diagram, I think it showed this turnout sitting over top of the gap as well. That was simple. I just simply moved it back in my track plan, so it's going to be back here. So that's one of the things that makes it great about using a program like CAD-Rail, is you can go back, you can easily move turnouts around, you can play with different track alignments and adjust for things that you find out aren't going to work the best on the actual module once you've got your track plan transferred. And that's one of the things that I think is very important point in all of this, is that just because you transferred the track plan to the module doesn't mean that it's over with and done, because there are often things that you're going to need to change after the fact. So you'll see here, there's lines scribbled out here. Now, part of what I've done is, let me zoom out a little bit again. Now over here, you'll note that there's been quite a bit of change in this area. And that was dictated because one of the things that I always do after I design a layout and transfer it to the roadbed or the sub-roadbed here is lay out some buildings to make sure everything is going to work the way I think it will. Because sometimes the dimensions aren't exactly the same between the buildings and the ones that are provided with the programs. So in this case, I used a larger freight building here, so that immediately meant that this track was not going to work as a feeder for this particular freight depot. So we now have a spot right here next to the depot where a car can be spotted, and that will allow it to be unloaded. Plus, I have another one back here, but I think I'm going to take this one out because I really don't need it. I had at one time, I did consider that I could bring in a car and spot it here and have a unloading platform like this, but that just doesn't seem to fit there. I might still do it if I can find a kit that is a much smaller platform and put that in, or if I can build one. But I'm thinking now I'm just going to take this track right here out, and that way it interferes less with the back of the station. Now let's take a look at the station, because that was another major change here. Now, if you look here, you'll see that this was the original outline of the station. And that was based on this. This is the outline of the building. So I could set the building up like this. But that's a little bit close to this track. So then I dug around in my box parts that this was in and found this, which is the base for this station. It sits like that. So we've got a nice brick platform here right adjacent to the track, and it greatly increases the distance that this station gets set back from the track. So that piece of track here had to come out to allow for that. I still have this one, as I said, but it's very close to the back door there, so I think I'm going to take this out. It just does not work so well with the plan as it now sits. And I did leave in this track here to the right of the station, and this would be the type of a spot that would be used for a business car to be set out, or for a sleeper, anything like that. You could have an RPO or a baggage car just left here occasionally, that kind of thing. So it's a station track basically then. So that's still going to be there. And then, assuming I go with that whole plan like that, let me get this out of the way, then we will have this piece of track going straight down to here and terminating down here. So that will basically allow us to have a short ladder going down here, connecting to this track that feeds the meatpacking plant. And I have a few Swift meat reefers that can be used to switch this particular facility, so we'll set something up there for that. So that's going to work out fine. So I do have this building, and that will be repurposed. That was originally the Railway Express office in Charlottesville on the old Piedmont Southern, so I kept that, and we'll use that here for a meat packing plant. So we'll get that set up later on. This will also be a switching lead to get back down into the other section of the layout. So let's go take a look over there. Now you can see what I've done is basically just got rid of this piece of track, moved it back an inch or so to allow for that setback for all this other stuff that we've changed. And so that piece of track will run all the way out to here somewhere. I haven't determined exactly where I'm going to be stopping it. I could actually put a team track back here too, or another small industry, anything with a small footprint. Now let me walk around to the back because there's some stuff back there to show you. Okay, so in the old plan we had a track here and a track here that fed small industries on each side here. And that is still possible. So I could take that, I could bring another one off here and have two at an angle. Another thing I could do is run this back to here and then bring it down and along the back of the layout and have a couple of Walther's flats back here, and that would give us 2 or 3 spots back here to work with. So that I think is going to be a little bit more of an interesting approach than having the 2 pieces of separate track with everything at an angle. I think it's going to build in the backdrop a little bit more and bring it in and make it more an active part of the layout. And I'll be using the same photo backdrop that I had previously up in the Charlottesville area of all the industrial buildings in Lynchburg, Virginia. So they will all be on the backdrop, and then these other buildings will be in front of that, so everything will kind of integrate into a small industrial switching area. So one of the realities is that there's always some changes that you're going to want to make after you lay out your track plan on the modules themselves or on your layout. So don't be afraid to go back and make those changes and experiment. And like I said, make sure if you are going to be working with a particular building, that you get that building out of the kit box and at least check out, find out if it has a base plate like this that you need to account for, because that's a big change right there. Let me tell you, you can see we've gone back quite a bit here with that, and it makes it look better. Let's go ahead and take a look at the diagrams and I'll show you what I've done with that. Okay, so this first diagram basically just shows you all of those changes that I made here. Now, one other thing I didn't point out was I've taken the pulp yard, which was located at the far left end of Alexander module, and I've moved it out onto an adjacent module that will be added in the future. And we'll take a look at that just in a second. So that's pretty much it. So this diagram here, this figure just encapsulates everything I just covered with the actual module. So you can take a look at that if you want, do a screen capture and look at it in isolation after you've watched the video. Okay, let's take a look at the next two because I think these are very important. Now, right off, this one shows the original layout configuration I was thinking about, and that was the big oval type of operation, you know, with Alexander on one side and Tinbury on the other. However, after looking at that for a while, it seemed to be quite limiting in interest as far as I was concerned, because you just got a big roundabout and that's it. Gives you the continuous run, some switching to do in each one of those areas, but not a lot else. Plus, I was also thinking of how down the road could I add staging to this, because that could be important to feed traffic in here, because I'm not going to have enough room for all the cars I've got and all my locomotives on the top of this. So let's look at the next diagram, because that gives you an idea of where my thinking is with respect to that. Okay, so if you look at this, what I've done is I've put Alexander up here at the top and Tinbury here on the left and connected them with a curve here in the corner. So that will allow me to go at least between the two. And then I was thinking, okay, how can I expand it out at each end to give me a return loop? So, as you can see, I've added at the top an additional 8-foot module and then a return loop, and that's at each end. So that will allow me to give continuous running with a reverse loop at each end of the layout. Another interesting thing, that also brings in a lot of scenic opportunities, because in this module on the far left that connects the two existing modules together, I'll be able to do some scenic work. I'll be able to put the pulp yard out there. I'll be able to do things with the other module, extend some of those tracks out onto that module. So that gives us quite a bit more to do here in that corner. And then down at each end, let's go back up to Alexander, because I've got another 8-foot module up there that I can add in. So that could be more industrial work, small town. It could be a small yard in there. I could have 8-foot long yard stashed in to the right there and coming off of the second track. So that should be a lot more potential. And then we've got the return loops at each end. And there's a lot of space in each one of those return loops where you can add more industries. So again, putting in more switching at both sides. Up here near Alexander, I could put in a river and use a water-powered mill up there, anything like that. I've got structures like that I could use. Down below here on the other end, in that big area, I could add a quarry, I could add a colliery, any kind of thing like that to make it more interesting. And then, as I said, one of the thoughts I had that drove me to go from the oval to this linear design with return loops at each end is that one thing I could do is on the back side of each one of these reverse loops is run a track out behind the module and put say a 12-inch wide shelf on the back side of the modules with tracks back there for hidden staging. So I would be able to put in a staging yard on the back side of each of these modules and be able to run trains in and out of those. So that has a lot more operational potential. So this is one of those games where, as I'm designing it, I'm trying to think down the road of how I can actually expand operations for the modules. Well, that's it for this week's video. It's been kind of a short one, I think, but I wanted to share with you the changes that I had made to the track plan, some of which I said in response to your comments, some of them some things that I discovered when I started putting actual buildings on the layout and testing out whether or not a car could get by in front of them, things of that nature. So that's one of the things you want to do is set it up and try it out first before you lay track or anything like that, because you don't want to find out that everything that you designed and transferred to your layout really doesn't work as well as you thought it might. And that's where putting it down, laying tracks out, laying buildings out, and running some cars on here and seeing whether it's really going to work for you and it's all going to fit together. Next week, we're going to go back and answer some of the questions that came up about using static grass, because I got in touch with Martin Reese, who is the fellow that you see in all those videos for WW Scenics, and he wrote me a really nice email back explaining a lot of what he has learned about static grass over the last 15 or so years that they've been manufacturing it. So I think that it answered a lot of the questions I had, and it also kind of pointed me in the right directions for the test we want to do for showing how different ways of using static grass can work and not work for you on your model railroad. So I'm looking forward to doing that video next week. In the meantime, have a great weekend, have a great week, and I'll see you here then with another video from the DCC Guy. Bye now.